I am Vinny Vernuccio. I am president of Institute for the American Worker, and this is the Protecting Independent Contractors webinar. We have got a great lineup for you today, which I'm going to go into in just a minute. But just want to say thank you all for taking the time. And we are very excited to start talking about the Modern Worker Security Act and the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, both bills introduced by Representative Kevin Kiley from California. And if I could just take a personal privilege, when I was starting I4AW, I wasn't just the president, I was also a client. I've been an independent contractor working for different organizations for years before recently going full-time at I4AW. And, let me tell you, especially when we're talking about the Modern Worker Security Act, getting benefits was an absolute pain. You had to pay through the nose. The paperwork was through the roof. And I would have been so much happier if I could just go to one of my clients and say, hey, we're working great together. I would love to just buy benefits from you. Unfortunately, because of the current law, that would have put them at risk and would have put my business model at risk for changing that to an employment status. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. It cost me and my family a lot of money. It also cost a lot of time and a lot of headaches in paperwork, just simply because of this quirk in employment status. So Huntley, I just want to say thank you again to you and your boss for bringing both of these bills that are going to help independent contractors like me, like Kim, Kevin, who you're about to hear from, and others. So we are big fans and just wanted to say thank you. So with that, Huntley, we're going to start with you after I go through the bios, but we've got Huntley Campbell, the legislative assistant for Representative Kevin Kiley, and he's going to do a very high-level briefing on the bills, and more importantly, what people on this call can do to be helpful. After Huntley, we have Kim Kevin, who has been a professional freelance writer for more than 20 years. Her bylines have appeared from the Washington Post to the Entrepreneur to yachting magazines. And Kim, I always love all the boating references that you can work in and some of your information there. I know you graduated from the Missouri Law School of Journalism in '94. And that you spent about a decade working for daily newspapers and magazines, and then, found your calling, if it will, being your own boss, working from your home office, and doing freelancing since, 2003. After Kim, Jonathan Wolfson is going to speak, and he oversees the policy team and the legal strategy at the Cicero Institute and focuses on healthcare, regulatory reform, and workforce policies. He also runs the Law and Policy Fellowship program over there. Before Cicero, he led the policy office at the U.S. Department of Labor in the first Trump administration and served as a policy analyst in the White House Council of Economic Advisors during the Bush administration. I've known Jonathan Wolfson for years. He's been around the block, incredible expert with a wealth of knowledge. And speaking of expertise, batting cleanup is Leah Pachiashvili. She is a senior research fellow and director of labor policy and the Labor Policy Project at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Once again, a very accomplished writer, in addition to Kim. She has written in academic journals and books and media outlets such as the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal, kind of the bookends, if you will, of policy views. And she regularly writes for Substack, The Labor Market Matters, and has a regular column in The Hill. She has testified before several state legislators, including the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. So with that, you see we've got the experts, but before that, Kim, also an expert, but tell us your personal story of, how these bills would help you and some of the challenges that you see facing under the current climate.
Good morning, everybody. I'm your real person here today. I'm just an everyday American who makes money as an independent contractor. And I'm here because I really want my government to stop attacking my freedom to earn a living. As Vinny explained, I'm a writer and editor. I graduated from journalism school in 1994. I spent about 10 years as a staff editor for newspapers and magazines, and then I went full-time freelance a little more than 20 years ago. I had a couple reasons for going freelance. One was that I could make more money. I'm a really fast writer, so as an employee, my bosses would make me do 3 times as much work as the guy sitting next to me, but they paid me the same. As a freelancer, I get paid extra if I write extra. Another big reason I went freelance is more personal. It's a little bit scary to hear, but very briefly, back in the late 1990s, a man I didn't know who had paranoid schizophrenia snuck up behind me, and he had a knife. I was lucky to survive, but I struggled for a while after that with post-traumatic stress disorder. Being a freelancer was a game changer for me because I could feel safe working in my home office. I could concentrate. I've been a successful independent professional for more than 20 years since then, which is why it's so unbelievable to me that some lawmakers keep trying to restrict or outlaw careers like mine. The current policy mess started in 2019 when California passed a law that changed the definition of an independent contractor in really unreasonable ways. Award-winning writers that I know in California suddenly had longtime editors calling them and saying they could no longer work together the way they always had. They were afraid of breaking the new law. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. And outrageous things like that happened to independent contractors in more than 600 professions. Things went really nuts after that. First, my own state of New Jersey tried to copy the California law. Several of us created a Facebook group that morphed into a grassroots movement called Fight for Freelancers. We packed our state house to standing room only. We testified for more than 4 hours until lawmakers realized they needed to stop threatening all of us independent contractors. Thankfully, the New Jersey bill died. But then members of Congress tried to advance similar regulatory language nationwide with the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. The executive branch also set out to redefine independent contractors. I had to learn how to write amicus briefs for the National Labor Relations Board and the United States Supreme Court. I testified before Congress about why attacking Americans like me is utterly ridiculous. I became a plaintiff in a federal lawsuit against the Department of Labor. What Congressman Kiley is trying to do with these bills is put guardrails in place to stop this madness. I'll give you 2 examples from my own life for how these bills can help. The Modern Worker Empowerment Act would make sure that freelancers like me aren't misclassified as employees because of vague or shifting federal rules. Just one example is that some federal classification tests look at whether too much of your income is from one client or whether your work seems permanent with a company. Well, a few months ago, one company bought up a half a dozen of the magazines that I freelance with. Nothing changed about my day-to-day. I still freelance with 6 different editors for 6 different magazines. But on paper, they're one company now, so my independent status could be at risk. Congressman Kiley's bill creates a clear standard so freelancers like me don't lose our autonomy because of technicalities. The Modern Worker Security Act is about making it easier for freelancers like me to access things like group health insurance without losing our independent status. Right now, companies or trade groups often hold that access back because federal law could use it as evidence that we're employees. As Vinny explained to you a second ago, that means freelancers like me are stuck with expensive individual plans. I'm 52 years old. I'm in good health. I'm paying $1,000 a month now in premiums for a silver level plan, not even gold level. And when I needed surgery in both my eyes this month, I had to pay $10,000 for it out of pocket. Congressman Kiley's bill ensures that freelancers like me can have benefits options without putting our independence at risk. I know things on Capitol Hill are hectic, but it is urgent for Congress to help independent contractors like me. Just last week, the new head of the Democratic National Committee issued his framework for the future. The party plans to keep pushing this nonsense. Congressman Kiley's bills would protect us so we can all just get back to work. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Great. Thanks, Kim. And by the way, I'm very glad the surgery went well.
I
So
can see you very
yes,
clearly.
fantastic. And just echoing Kim, there is the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. I see a couple questions have already come in. We will address as many as we can at the end. But if you do have questions, please enter it in the Q&A at the bottom. If that is having any issues, you can also feel free to email me at Vinnie, Vinnie, at the number 4aw.org, Vinnie at I4aw.org. With that, Huntley Campbell, I know Kim gave just a very brief mention of Representative Kiley's fantastic bills. Could you go into detail, a little bit more detail on both bills and how people on this call can assist you and can assist your boss?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Vinny, and thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your personal experience. This is a really important conversation. Independent work is nothing new. For centuries, Americans have built businesses, pursued opportunities, and charted their own course. But today, independent workers, freelancers, gig workers, and self-employed professionals face increasing challenges, not because of the work itself, but because of outdated and ambiguous federal labor laws. The government hasn't kept up with the modern economy. Instead of supporting independent workers, federal policies have sown confusion and created legal risks that discourage businesses from working with them. And so the result is more barriers, fewer opportunities, and a workforce that's left in limbo. So that's why my boss, Representative Kevin Kiley, introduced the Modern Worker Empowerment Act and the Modern Worker Security Act. These bills tackle two critical problems that independent contractors face: how they're classified and whether they can access benefits without losing their independence. For millions of independent workers, the question of, am I an independent contractor or an employee, is not just a technicality. It determines whether they can continue working on their own terms. A few years ago, the Department of Labor put in place a clear and predictable test to determine your employee stat or your worker status, excuse me. But the Biden administration scrapped it and replaced it with an ambiguous multi-factor test that provided no real certainty for businesses or workers. Now workers want to hire independent contractors risk being sued for misclassification, and independent workers risk losing opportunities because businesses are nervous about working with them. The Modern Worker Empowerment Act fixes this by restoring a straightforward classification test. If a business does not exercise significant control over how the work is performed, and two, if the worker has entrepreneurial opportunities and risks, then they are an independent contractor, period. This clarity will allow millions of workers to confidently remain independent and businesses to engage with them without fear of lawsuits or penalties. Another issue right now, independent contractors lack access to benefits like health insurance and retirement savings, not because businesses don't want to offer them, but because doing so could trigger legal consequences. If a company provides portable benefits to an independent worker, the government may argue that this makes the worker actually an employee, opening the business up to lawsuits, back taxes, and regulatory penalties. The Modern Worker Security Act removes this barrier by ensuring that offering portable benefits does not affect worker classification under federal law. So this means that businesses can voluntarily provide benefits without legal risk, and workers can access health insurance, retirement plans, and other financial protections while remaining independent. It's a win-win. And so independent workers get security, businesses get the freedom to support the workforce without fear of misclassification lawsuits. Independent work isn't going away, it's growing, and more than a third of the American workforce engages in independent work in some form. These professionals, parents, entrepreneurs, skilled tradespeople, they rely on flexible work arrangements to support their families and build their futures. And they shouldn't have to choose between flexibility and stability. So with these two bills, we're taking a stand. Independent workers deserve clarity, they deserve access to benefits, they deserve a legal framework that respects their right to work on their own terms. And so the best way to get the message out is to reach out to members of Congress, especially those who sit on the Education and Workforce Committee. But really, the challenge is just getting the word out and making sure that members know why these bills are important to you. Anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about these bills, and look forward to hearing more from the panelists.
Great. Thank you, Huntley, and thank you for all your and Representative Kiley's great work on these. We are going to post both the bill names and the numbers in the chat, as well as some other resources. So if you are watching, if you can click on the chat, that information will be coming soon. With that, Jonathan Wolfson, can you start us off in a little more of a deep dive on the Modern Worker Empowerment Act?
Yeah, thanks, Vinny, and thanks everybody for being here today. You know, the Modern Worker Empowerment Act is an attempt to address a challenge in the Fair Labor Standards Act definitions. These definitions have been in place since the 1940s, and you know, it's a very circular definition. If you look at the actual language of the Fair Labor Standards Act, employer is defined as the words it actually say. I'm just going to read it. Employer includes any person acting directly or indirectly in the interest of an employer in relation to an employee. And an employee means an individual employed by an employer. Now, those are interesting ways to define it, but unfortunately, the lack of clarity in what those words mean has created lots of challenges for individuals who are wanting to work with businesses, but do not want to be seen as employees. And in part, that challenge is that the Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't define what an independent worker or an independent contractor or a self-employed individual is. It's just kind of the absence of these things. And that has created lots of challenges. And those challenges have been met by attempts to write regulations or guidance documents or court decisions over the years. And ultimately, there have created a number of facts and circumstances tests. And while facts and circumstances is a fun thing for lawyers because it allows us lawyers to bill a lot of hours to our clients in investigating those facts and circumstances and in arguing those facts and circumstances in court, those facts and circumstances tests are not very helpful for a worker who is trying to know what their status is, or for a business that is attempting to employ or work with one of those workers. And so as a result, you end up with a lot of litigation, or at least litigation risk. And this risk drives down the demand for businesses to work with independent workers because they're afraid of the consequences. And so these facts and circumstances tests vary in how the courts use them. They vary in how the U.S. Department of Labor has used them over time. And so as a result of that, when I was at the U.S. Department of Labor, a great team under the Wage and Hour Division and working with Secretary Scalia worked together to evaluate all of the case law around the country and identify that there really were two main factors. And those two main factors that determined independent contractor status were the opportunity for profit and loss and having control of the business. And that was codified in a rule in 2020. And then when the new administration, the Biden administration came into office, they pulled that rule down, and then they put in a 6-factor test. And those 6 factors include the opportunity for profit and loss. They include the amount of control, but they also include things like investment and the degree of permanence of the relationship. They also include how much skill or initiative a worker has to have. And then the last one, and this is really the linchpin of why these facts and circumstances tests are really important and challenging, is the extent to which the work performed is an integral part of the potential employer's business. Now, that's a lot of words, but what it really means is, what does the business you do in relationship to your independent worker? And the problem is that if you are someone like Kim who writes and you work for an entity that publishes writing, then most courts have said, when they look at this factor, they said, well, she's not doing something that looks like a window washer showing up at a building and the building produces writing. Instead, she's producing writing that is part and parcel of what that entity produces. Therefore, she has to be treated as an employee. And that's not how Kim wants to be treated. It's not how other folks in those relationships want to be treated. But unfortunately, that is how the courts have treated it. But Representative Kiley and Representative Stefanik, who introduced a similar bill previously, deserve a lot of kudos, because this bill really would clarify the definition in the statute to help avoid confusion and eliminate the need for the Department of Labor to be out there creating the law, and would instead allow Congress to do their job and create the law So then the people who live under that law can actually live under it. And so, the bill as proposed takes those two factors, which, I will throw my own bias in. I think those really are the two most important factors that generally do determine in the court cases, or generally have been important to deciding whether or not someone's an independent contractor. And those two factors really are the linchpin. And so Representative Kiley has recognized that and said, let's codify that as a clear exception to the Fair Labor Standards Act definition of who is an employee. Why does this matter? Well, this matters, first of all, because there are, as has already been mentioned, millions of people who are happy self-employed workers. They like their status as independent contractors. They are not begging Congress to change their status from independent worker to an employee. They understand what the relationship is that they have entered into. They do not believe that they're employees and are suddenly surprised when they find out that they are independent workers. These are individuals who understand the risks and benefits and have chosen to go into business for themselves. And because they understand the economic relationships they're in, they don't expect to receive these protections of the Fair Labor Standards Act. But the businesses that are working with them are in constant fear, or at least the lawyers at those businesses are in constant fear, that these relationships might wind up being found by a court to be not independent contractor. They're worried that an investigator from a state unemployment office or from the Fair Labor Standards Act investigators from the Wage and Hour Division at the U.S. Department of Labor will show up and say, we think you've misclassified these workers. And now there's a potential for fines and penalties for failure to keep records, for failure to provide the, again, protections of the Fair Labor Standards Act or the protections under state law. And so as a result, many businesses choose not to work with these workers, but providing clarity, which a statute would be the most clear rather than having some sort of regulatory clarity, having statutory clarity, which is what Representative Kiley's bill does, will go a long way to keeping these lawyers out of the decision to work or to hire independent workers by these businesses. And I think that is really the key feature of putting this into statute. And that's why I think the bill is a really important step forward in making it so that the workers who want to be independent workers have that opportunity to be independent, that the businesses that want to work with those independent workers have the ability to hire them, and so that there aren't busybodies, whether it's from the government or lawyers or judges, looking over that relationship and scrutinizing it and trying to decide whether or not those two parties had full knowledge of everything they were doing, but instead understand that people have the right to contract with one another and to reach these fair agreements that do allow workers to work and businesses to work with those workers to the benefit of all of the parties involved.
Hey, great, Jonathan. And before moving over to Leah, I'm just going to take a moderator's privilege. We have a bunch of questions coming in. There are more. If you do have a question, we will try to get to all of them, but please enter it in the Q&A button on the bottom. But I want to do one quick recap question, Jonathan. So essentially what you're saying is the way the current system works, especially with the Biden rule, it's creating more work for, no offense to you and me as lawyers, but to lawyers. And what Representative Kiley's bill wants to do is create more work for people like him.
I couldn't have summarized it better myself, Vinny.
So everyone pick your team. With that, Leah Pachiashvili, could you tell us about the Modern Worker Security Act?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Leah. I'm an economist at the Marketa Center. I've been working on this research on independent workforce and portal benefits for many years now, and I'll actually start with a quick personal story that on February 27th, 2020, so almost exactly 5 years ago, I did my very first briefing on the Hill trying to inform policymakers about this very issue of portable benefits and just highlighting how there are these legal barriers in the law that prevent the voluntary flow of benefits. And at the time, of course, no one batted an eye and they're like, this is an obscure and weird thing. Why is she talking about this? And, of course, then the pandemic came around and, everyone got distracted with more important things. And so it's very exciting to see that this is now the momentum is growing on this, both at the state level and at the federal level. And there's really quite an appetite to try to find ways to help independent contractors and independent workers like Kim on here. So basically, the Modern Worker Security Act is very simple. It just says that no federal agencies can use the presence of benefits to determine whether a worker is an employee or independent contractor. It's an enormous step towards unleashing voluntary, flexible, and portable benefits for independent workers. And I have 3 points I just want to highlight, connected to this. So point number 1, which has been discussed a little bit before, which is that independent contractors' lives would be enhanced if they had access to benefits. We heard from Kim, but actually Kim's story reflects what we're seeing in the aggregate data on this. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics latest contingent and worker survey found that more than 80% of independent contractors prefer their non-traditional work arrangements, and fewer than 10%, want to be W-2 employees. And on top of that, a recent study in the Journal of Economic Perspectives found that more than 80% of self-employed workers want access to portable and flexible benefits. And they even defined, what does portable and flexible benefits mean? Do you want this? And the workers said, yes, we do. So we get this kind of aggregate data scene where we see a bunch of independent workers who want to stay in their non-traditional work arrangements. Some of them choose it for personal reasons, right? Some of them might choose it because it's better professionally for them and they can make more money that way, as Kim highlighted too. But for whatever reason, we see a strong preference to be in these work arrangements, in particular because workers in non-traditional work arrangements value flexibility, and not just flexibility, oh, I'm gonna ask my boss if I can come in late on time. The real world word here is work autonomy, right? It's really more than just oh, I have flexible work arrangements. It's really work autonomy. And we're seeing that come across in every survey that I've seen, that workers truly value this work autonomy. But at the same time, they also want to have access to portable and flexible benefits that can stay with them and they can carry with them as they work with many different clients or employers at a given time. And so what the sort of bill would do is that it won't force workers to choose between kind of structured employment with benefits on the one hand, or have work autonomy with no benefits on the other hand. So it removes that issue that would create a risk for companies if they wanted to voluntarily provide benefits to independent workers. So the second thing I want to highlight is that states are actually already experimenting with these ideas with various portable benefits models, and this bill would help in that effort. So in 2023, the Utah legislator got a hold of my portable benefits policy brief, and so they passed a bill in Utah basically saying exactly what this Modern Worker Security Act says, but for Utah, it says that that they can't use the presence of benefits to determine whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor in the state of Utah. And that was passed in May of 2023. And I have a testimony related to this and other things up on my website at Marketis. And as a result, we've had 2 pilot programs that have launched in Utah. So Target Ship launched a pilot portable benefits program with the benefits company Stride. They launched that, I think, last year in April. And then a few months ago, Lyft also launched a pilot portable benefits program in Utah, also testing out this innovative solution where independent workers can have access also to benefits. Similarly, with the support of Pennsylvania's governor, DoorDash also introduced a first of its kind portable pilots program. I think that was also in April they launched it. And then recently they also launched a similar program in Georgia. And so we are seeing an appetite at the state level to do this. A lot of interest from workers, from companies. And I've talked to many state policymakers as well, who want to pass this in their state, but they're also limited because, no matter what the states do, companies are also under their jurisdiction of, Department of Labor and IRS and so forth, which will use the presence of benefits to determine whether a worker is an employee or independent contractor. I actually led a task force for the Utah legislator where we talked to many different companies and associations. And one of the biggest takeaway was that a barrier to implementing portable benefits in Utah was fear from the federal level. And so this bill would help mitigate those fears because they would allow these companies to continue their experimentation with portable benefits models in those states. And so that gets me to my third point, is that this bill, it does an excellent job of providing a safe harbor
for state and local experimentation with portable benefits and to unleash a system of voluntary portable benefits for independent workers and freelancers and contractors across the US, not to have to choose between being, having complete work autonomy as an independent worker and having, no access to benefits. And so that's kind of the exciting thing that's happening. I see the momentum is here. It's a small step, right? There could be other things following up on equalizing tax treatment and so forth. But this sort of first step is, I call it legalizing access to benefits for independent contractors. It's a small but necessary step, and it would help unleash the flow of benefits to independent contractors and allow states and localities to experiment, to find the best system that works, for those residents. And with that, I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leah. And we are getting a bunch of questions in. We definitely do not have a shy group here. The first one I want to address is actually someone was, I think, John Lopez. Thank you for your questions. We're going to try to get to a lot of those. But you did have a clarification, and you were exactly right, talking about some of the ping-ponging of the Trump and Biden rules. And I think your clarification was that the Trump rule was reinstated in 2022 due to the federal court ruling in East Texas, and the first Biden rule was struck down then. With that, I know you had another question on the bill by Mark Warner, and let me get to that in 1 second. Excuse me. Your question was HR 1320, the Modern Worker Security Act. You asked if it was similar to the Portable Benefits Bill that was proposed by Senators Mark Warner and Todd.
Well, it looks like Vinny might be frozen for a second here, so we're going to turn it over to Jonathan to answer that question.
Thanks. Yeah, I was worried that was on my end. So I think that, I'm hopeful that Senator Warner and his team would be supportive of this bill. I think that the ethos are very similar. And so I think that the concept that allowing workers to have access to portable benefits, as Leah has talked about for years, ought not be a partisan issue. We did see, I will just say, some state legislative opportunities this year that were thwarted on partisan lines. And so I would be hopeful that Senator Warner and his team will continue to support this concept and will not see this as a partisan issue, and will continue to see this as an opportunity to expand workforce opportunities and the access to benefits for workers who make the choice to be independent.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. And am I coming in okay now?
We can hear you.
All right. Another question, is it suggested that we contact our senators or just our representatives for now? And I know Huntley had to jump off, but curious if anybody on the panel has input. Okay, I can take that one. Right now, it looks like the main bills are in the House, but if there is something in the Senate, obviously showing that we want to support independent contractors, we want to give them the autonomy they need and the benefits that would help them. I think would be extremely helpful. It looks like right now the House is focusing on that, but if the Senate does take up these issues, which they have done in the past, would be very helpful there. With that, is Representative Kiley, which is called a Freelancers Uncapped Heroes, and I very much agree with that, including in his bills to follow the established IRS guidelines. I think this question is very similar to the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, and opening up to the panel to answer that one.
Jonathan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think that the purpose of this bill is to deal with the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act, NLRB, issue with independent workers. It does not directly address the IRS definition. I think that that is another place that you can deal with it. I will say that the places that most businesses that I've talked to, most workers that I've talked to, that the biggest fears that you get from people do not tend to be on the IRS side. They tend to be on the Fair Labor Standards Act and NLRB side. And so I think that this bill does address kind of the biggest issues, you know, to Vinny's and my point about, are you worried about empowering lawyers or empowering workers? This bill does the most to deal with that. The tax attorney piece matters, but it matters to a much different type of extent because it's really about withholding. And so long as the independent workers understand their legal obligations to pay their taxes, which everyone is legally required to do, then the IRS issue becomes much less pressing.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I can just tag on to that, especially with the lawyers and with the different definitions. You've got the IRS definition, you've got the Fair Labor Standards Act definition, you've got the National Labor Relations Act definition, especially with the Modern Worker Empowerment Act. I think what the goal is to kind of smooth all those over. And honestly, the IRS definition is actually the best and most flexible for independent contractors defining if they want to work for themselves. So I know another reason for the Modern Worker Empowerment Act is kind of smoothing out those definitions to get them closer to that IRS definition. So I hope that answers your question. Speaking of questions, we have several questions on how this would interact with state laws. Would this just be federal? Would this overrule laws like we have seen in California? And I'll open that up to the panel as well.
Is Huntley still here? I had asked him.
Unfortunately, Huntley had to jump off. I don't know if they have directly addressed the California issue or have preemption. I think right now they are very much focused on just the federal law. And Jonathan, I think you have more information, so I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, so these laws would not preempt state law. So if states want to restrict things in the same way that if a state wants to have a higher minimum wage, if a state wants to have a different overtime threshold, that is what the Fair Labor Standards Act does is it provides a floor below which states cannot go. But if states would like to impose additional rules and restrictions on their businesses, nothing about the Fair Labor Standards Act limits them from doing so. The wisdom of that is highly questionable, but I think that, in the spirit of federalism, I don't think that Representative Kiley believes that the right path here, and I'm not going to speak for him, but in reading the bill, nothing about this bill would prevent New Jersey or California from imposing their own. But I do think that by having this really clear federal standard, you do make it a little more work for local officials who want to do something different because they're going to have to enforce entirely different laws, meaning that that's going to make it that much more burdensome for businesses in their state to comply. And that's going to drive those businesses out of their state. It's going to, as we saw after California passed AB 5, we saw lots of independent workers leave the state of California. We saw businesses in California move out of California so they could continue their business models. And then we also saw significant lobbying efforts to get those laws changed and create exceptions. So I think that while the bills do not address the state laws in particular, they would provide a very clear contrast of the states that do not have additional burdens on the businesses versus those that choose to impose those additional burdens.
Great.
I can add something to that at the state level from the grassroots perspective. What we have seen everywhere, California, New Jersey, whenever people have tried to restrict the freedom to earn a living this way, it is outrage. As Leah mentioned, if you look at the data, 80% of independent contractors are saying we're happy with our choices, leave us alone, maybe make it a little easier to do certain things, but we do not want to be employees. And what we keep hearing from lawmakers who are pushing this stuff is, oh, you're going to be better off as employees. We don't want to be employees. And so wherever this has been tried, the only thing it has really ended up organizing is opposition to the people pushing it. It's a very clear issue from the perspective of real people, where I mentioned in my testimony, we had a packed state house in New Jersey. That wasn't just writers, truckers, musicians, bakers, graphic designers. There were so many different kinds of people there just telling the lawmakers, stop what you're doing. It was a flood of people, and you don't see that kind of thing for this type of legislate. This isn't sexy legislative topic that's on the news every day. People care about how we earn a living, and those of us who choose to earn a living this way, we are entrepreneurial minded people. It feels like a very personal attack when lawmakers threaten to take this freedom away. So the legalese stuff is very important, obviously. And I'm glad we have lawyers like Jonathan here to explain that kind of thing. I think when we're talking about when Huntley asked, how can you help? It's a no-brainer to me that lawmakers want to be on the side of this that the public is on the side of. Gallup polls show 2/3 of Americans, if they had their druthers, would be their own boss. They want what people like me have achieved. We should not shut that pathway down. We need that pathway to the American dream to stay open.
Great. Well said, Kim. And Kim, I want to stick with you because, man, you have a lot of fans in the chat and in the Q&A here. So you are very popular, and rightfully so. But what have you heard, with these bills on the state level? I know you've testified before Congress. What does the other side say? What is the opposition to allowing more freedom and flexibility to independent contractors and to the people that want to work with them?
So what usually happens is they frame this differently. And they say that their goal is to stop the misclassification of people who should be employees who are being called independent contractors. And they have made extremely huge claims. There have been congressmen who have issued press releases saying there's something like $4 billion with a B dollars a year being lost to this. But when the government has actually gone in and looked for it, it's not even remotely, it's not even 1 billion. It's not even $500 million. It's not even 100 billion. I think they found $41 million or something like that. And nobody wants anybody to be misclassified. Nobody's arguing their point. If you are being treated as an employee, you should be classified as an employee. However, the way they keep trying to rearrange these tests would misclassify legitimate, it has misclassified in California, legitimate independent contractors as employees. And they keep saying, oh, well, that's no problem. What'll happen is they'll just turn your work into a regular job. There is absolutely zero evidence of that happening on any broad scale. Leah has done tremendous research to prove this on paper. We know it anecdotally from a lot of people who have stories about losing their livelihoods. And Representative Kiley has bringing their stories to the forefront for years now. So the notion that it is somehow protecting people like me by taking away our path to the American dream through self-employment, I just don't understand that stance. It doesn't make any sense to me. You're not protecting me by making it impossible for me to earn a living. You're attacking me. You're harming me. So that's their position. That's my take on their position. And I really, really wish they would stop. We've asked them nicely to stop. They won't stop. Here we are. We need legislation to fix this.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Let's see. Another question we have, and Leah, this looks like it was focused on something you said. It says, I believe Leah said the Modern Worker Security Act prevents federal agencies from using portable benefits to determine an employee independent contractor status. Would it also stop other entities such as from using this against ICs, such as state agencies and others? Leah, I don't know if you want to address that. I know that kind of goes to some of the state preemption we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's similar to what Jonathan said. No, it doesn't. So the states also have their own standards. So, but I do think, based on my kind of discussion with state policymakers, meeting with different people and educating, informing them about this, about these efforts, portable benefits effort, is if they see that the federal government will do it, the state legislators are probably more likely to pass it as well. At least some of them. We've seen that. I've seen that. I've heard that from some state policymakers saying that, oh, if the federal government will do it, then we'll do it as well in our state level. But nothing in the bill itself will preempt like what the state law is on this. So I don't know, Jonathan, you're the lawyer on this, but I think that's the same analysis as you provided before. I don't think that they're going to be able to do anything else.
Yeah, I do think that Leah's right. There are states that are waiting for the federal government to make this very clear, and then they will be happy to put these portable benefits laws in place, because there are, state tax treatments of these things that might be affected. And so they're interested in having a streamlined process for the businesses in their state. And so one of the criticisms that Leah and I have heard in some states is, well, this is going to actually make it harder for the businesses in our state because they'll do this, and then in our state we recognize it, but the feds don't. And so it is a chicken or egg issue. But I do think if the federal government takes the big first step, a large number of states that want to support independent workers will be quickly following behind.
And this is Leo once again to plug your great work in Utah with the portable benefits there. That the reason that is so helpful. So now those workers in Utah, if these bills pass, will be protected both at a federal level and also at the state level. And it's also Utah signaling the feds that this is important. We want to make sure that independent contractors have this great access to benefits that employees have as well. The next one I have here is not a question, but I'm going to.
All right, it looks like we're having some internet troubles with Vinny one more time. Jonathan or Leah, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to the conversation or want to address one of the questions?
Oh, I think
So
Vinny's
I saw
back.
a question. Oh, Vinny's back.
Yes, my apologies. I'm not sure what's going on with my internet. But Kim, you got another shout out in the questions, and you just wanted to say, I want to say yes with a 100% icon and 3 high fives to everything that Kim has said. So Kim, once again, you have a ton of fans. But with that, I know we are running short on time. Jonathan, I want to start with you on if you have any close, but more importantly, also, where can the panelists get more information and dig deeper into some of these issues?
Yeah, thanks, Vinny, and thanks Institute for the American Worker for hosting, and everybody for joining today. It's been a privilege to be here. I'm at sisterinstitute.org, but probably the best resource on this topic would be the white paper that Leah and I put together about over the summer on this topic. And there's been a lot of discussion about what does this mean on the federal side. I fully expect to see this sort of activity by the legislature take priority. And I think if the legislature can act, it avoids the challenge of the U.S. Department of Labor having to try to come up with its own set of a new independent contractor rule, which would likely be tied up in court under the post-Chevron world. And so I think that this is a really important piece of legislation in the time that we are in right now.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Leah, same question.
Yeah, so the best resource on this is Jonathan and I have a federal what is it called? Federal Policy Guide on Portable Benefits available on our website at marcatus.org. I'll put that in the chat here. I have a ton of resources on this on my Substack called Labor Market Matters. So I have a bunch of things on portable benefits, but also on worker classification issues. So we did the first study on California's AB5, first empirical study of California's AB5, and saw what the results were for employment in California after AB5 was enacted. All of that is on my Labor Market Matters Substack. And then we also have a brand new study that's out. Well, it's not, the full study is not out yet, but I've summarized all the results on my Substack. It's about, it's looking at every state that has passed an ABC test law and what the impact has been on employment in that state. It's the first causal analysis of state ABC test laws and their impact on employment. And just a short kind of summary key points there is that we found that when a state adopts an ABC test, it leads to a decrease in self-employment, which is expected. But the most surprising thing that we found is that it also reduces W-2 employment in those states, both in the long run and both in the short run and the long run, and longer run meaning over 15 years. And our results are causal, meaning we could definitively say that the ABC test caused a reduction in W-2 employment in those states. So we have that up on my Substack, that's Labor Market Matters. And any new research that comes out, we highlight all the research on there. When the BLS released the new survey on independent contractors that I mentioned here, we did analysis of that as well, highlighting different industry and demographic trends. And so feel free to, reach out to me. I'll put my email address in this chat as well. And thank you again for your time, Vinny. Thank you for hosting this. And I think this, again, both bills are a great step towards helping independent workers. And in particular, the Modern Worker Security Act is a great way to help workers who don't have access to benefits have access to benefits. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leah. And thank you, Leah and Jonathan, for all your work on this. Kim, I know you are involved with and have founded some great groups. I'd love for you to talk about them just very briefly.
So I'm a co-founder of a group called Fight for Freelancers. I see a number of our folks here in the chat. And hi, everybody. Folks can find that group at on Facebook. Just type in Fight for Freelancers. We have the nationwide group. There's also state level groups in states where this stuff is going on and folks are working on it. You can also find me. I write a Substack about this stuff twice a week. It's at freelancebusting.com. That's just me on my own doing that as I'm working on a book about this and now starting to talk about a documentary film, which is pretty cool. So hopefully we'll have more on this in the future for everybody, but what I try to do is, like, if Leah puts out a great study, she's a genius economist, which is fantastic, but I can't always understand everything that's going on. So I'll do a Q&A with her maybe and publish it in language that regular folks can a little more easily digest. That's my ability to contribute to all this stuff, is I'm a real person who asks real questions and can speak in a way that most folks can understand what's going on, because this stuff can get a little complicated. I wanted to add one other thing that I realized I should have mentioned when you asked me about the other side, Vinny. One thing people sometimes say is that they want to support restricting independent contractors because they think it's good for unions. I grew up in a union household. My parents were both public school teachers. There's zero evidence that harming people like me does anything to help unions. So I don't want people to think that this is in any way an anti-union situation that we're talking about here. If you look at the research from Gallup, most Americans believe folks should have the freedom to take a traditional job. If they want to join a union, knock yourself out, join a union. If you want to be your own boss, good for you, go and do that. That's all we're talking about here, is keeping the lane open to be our own boss. And I think it's important to make that clear. And I wish I would have said it when you asked me a little bit earlier.
Well, Kim, you still got it in. Once again, you have a lot of fans. Thank you for all you do. Jonathan and Leah, thank you for all your research and all your assistance. Leah, I'm sorry, did you have one more thing?
I actually wanted to add one more thing. I thought about what's the opposition say. So on portable benefits, we have this thing that started to come up, and the concern was that, if there are portable benefits, it's going to lead to more misclassification and more workers being independent contractors and fewer being W-2 employees. So I decided to test that directly using the Utah portable benefits bill to see if that's what we see. And actually, that's not true. So my analysis shows that in Utah, the number of W-2 employees continue to grow at a similar rate as before the enactment of the portable benefits bill. And likewise, the growth rate of self-employed workers remained unchanged. And so basically the portable benefits bill had no impact on the growth of W-2 employees and independent contractors in Utah. So what it seems like it's actually doing is just helping independent contractors who want to be independent contractors who are properly classified just gain access to benefits. That's at least my initial preliminary analysis of the Utah bill. And that's something we heard kind of in the opposition in different states. So I've had to address it directly.
Great, thank you, Leah. And your research on this is absolutely invaluable. Like Kim, I'm a lawyer, or not like Kim, I am a lawyer, but like Kim, I don't understand a lot of the economics, and your ability to break it down is incredibly helpful. With that, we will have these resources. We will provide those in a follow-up email with a recap of this call. Unfortunately, I know we have a couple more questions. If you still have questions, feel free to email me at Vinnie, VINNIE at i4aw.org. And I can get those over to the panelists. We can also share some of the panelists' contact information. And you can also find more information on these bills and labor legislation in general at I4AW.org, our website, I4AW.org. So please feel free to check it out. Check out Kim's work, Leah's work, and Jonathan's work. And thank you all for taking the time to join. And we hope to see you on the next Institute for the American Worker briefing on this and many great other issues in Congress. And to the panelists, thank you again for your time to participate.